he based his whole economy on the fact that the sun gave off energy without return.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was like a pure gift that you could not return. Participating in Monte Vista projects, like I didn't make any money on that. It was a loss. Like my art, every once in a while I'll sell a painting, but overall it's a loss.
And that's the whole scene that I'm documenting.
That's a potlatch. It's a gift to the world that I don't really even expect a return on.
I don't know if I'm that benevolent with the podcast.
I mean, I can't help doing it. I can't not make art. You know what I mean? Even if I'm never compensated monetarily for it, it's not the point for me. It's like I just can't help doing this. It just comes out of me.
Welcome to What's My Thesis. I'm your host Javier Proenza, and today my guest is Justin Michell. How you doing, Justin?
Good. How you doing? Good to see you.
Good to see you too, man. We know each other. You were a member of Monte Vista Projects. Mm-hmm. You have left on terrible terms. We all hate you. It has become a Justin Michell.
It was a really great experience being part of Monte Vista. I really appreciate that there's like a vibrant artist-run community of spaces in LA, and I definitely want to keep being part of that.
I do resent the fact that you say Vista, and now I feel like a fucking fake Latino because I say Monte Vista.
Yeah. I say Los Feliz too.
I can't fucking abide. I can't say.
I bet I've been here 20 years. You can't say Los Feliz anymore.
What's your background? Are you from LA? No.
I grew up near Philadelphia.
Near Philadelphia?
Yeah, it was kind of in the process of turning from like a lot of Mennonite farms where I grew up to kind of sprawl of Philadelphia by the time I left. And so it's probably unrecognizable to when I was a kid now, because it's all like, I guess LA is kind of like the model city, unfortunately, for a lot of places where it just becomes sprawl of a node that just keeps spreading on. Where I grew up is kind of becoming like that of Philadelphia.
I think that is just kind of like the lazy American way of building shit, where it's just like, fuck it.
Keep horizontal creep.
Yeah.
What city did you grow up in?
Rome.
Oh, okay.
So, but which is like, it's still pretty big.
Yeah.
But you can walk it.
I spent like half a year there when I was in college.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Loved it.
Did you know Carl also got his origins in Rome?
Yeah, we went to the same undergrad school, but we were there at different times.
Oh, okay.
So
it was definitely an influence on me. So I can see it a little bit in the work, like spending your 5 months over there. All right, man. So we definitely have a topic today, because you were getting into it a little bit when I saw you the other night, and I was like, God damn. For someone who calls himself a leftist, I am such an idiot, and I don't know any of this shit. Are we still doing the...
If you want, we can. We could talk about like Amadeo Bordiga, maybe, or something.
Okay, all right.
But I find him interesting because he's kind of not that many people who aren't terminally online know who he is, I think.
Okay.
But he was the first... he founded the Italian Communist Party in like 1922 or 27 or something like that, and he was eventually pushed out of the leadership by order from Moscow and replaced with Gramsci, who's a lot more well known than he is. And he was a militantly internationalist, but not a Trotskyist, which is unusual, because usually when you hear internationalist communists, you think of Trotsky. But he was not a Trotskyist. I probably couldn't get too into the difference between them because I'm not know that much about Trotsky. But he was basically the last member of the Comintern, the Third International, to tell Stalin to basically fuck off to his face and live to tell about it. Not get assassinated, because he was in fascist prisons for most of the 1930s. And
Well, that's the one thing I do know is that Mussolini was inspired by. He was a leftist originally, right?
Yeah, I think he was like an anarcho-syndicalist or something
Yeah,
weird
and
like that,
he
which
used
is
to write for like some leftist paper or some shit, and then
yeah.
but he took inspiration from it. And there was some, I forget exactly what the quote was, but there was some Marxist quote that he just completely turned into like, oh yeah, we should just fucking go to war all the time.
Yeah, right. Like the complete opposite of like Leninist
Yeah.
revolutionary defeatism. But
Well, what do you know about Lenin?
I guess Lenin to me is interesting because he was led the I guess possibly only communist revolution in the 20th century that made a point of being internationalist, which means like I keep going back to that term because Bordiga's big beef with Stalin, I guess, was involved a couple different things, but it involved, among other things, this idea of that like you could build socialism in a single country,
Mm-hmm.
which to him was completely nonsensical, basically, because capitalism is a world economic, political economic system,
Mm-hmm.
and to replace that, you would need another world economic system. So, the idea that you could be an isolated country surrounded and encircled by hostile forces and build socialism in a single country is kind of was completely absurd to Bordiga.
And seems played out pretty effectively by Latin American policy.
Yeah, I mean, basically, he didn't come up with the idea of like state capitalism because even Lenin referred to like the NEP, the New Economic Policy.
Mm-hmm.
Lenin called that state capitalism. So
Okay.
it's not like if you're a Orthodox Leninist, it shouldn't even really be that controversial to refer to the Soviet Union as state capitalism. But at the same time, you have someone like Stalin claiming that you're building socialism in a single country, or that like
Oh, okay, okay. That would make so the state capitalism would make it exclusively local.
well, it would almost be like the state functions as the de facto monopolistic capitalist
Okay.
because there really wasn't.
So that speaks to the thing that people say that like it wasn't necessarily a Marxist.
Yeah, and kind of points to the reason why because the Soviet Union was trading things like grain and steel on a world market as
Uh-huh.
commodities. So you're paying. You haven't gotten rid of wage labor. You're still paying workers in wages and then selling the products for a profit on the world market. And you're also competing militarily with, hostile encircling forces. So you're kind of having to instill like Taylor's labor discipline, like all the negative things that people don't like about being a wage slave were still
Still
in place
implement. Yeah,
there.
yeah.
Some theorists in the 20th century tried to make a case that the bureaucratic class in the USSR was a capitalist class. Bordiga didn't claim that. He thought it was kind of like even weirder. Like they weren't, because they had like maybe summer homes and like a higher pay grade, but they weren't, it wasn't quite the same thing as like owning the means of production. They were just sort of like managing the means of production
For
for
the
the
for the
state.
state. So it was still somewhat oligarch, plutocratic. I don't know if with
Yeah,
that.
I don't know. I mean, he didn't really spend too much time trying to describe exactly what type of government
Mm.
it was, but he thought it was almost like a headless kind of capitalism without a bourgeoisie. It was just
Yeah.
like the bourgeoisie is the world bourgeoisie, and if um, you didn't even necessarily have to have a local one for it to function.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what I mean? It would be like you could have a um, like a co-op that's worker owned, but that's still a capitalist enterprise because you're still calculating like this is not quite even Bordy anymore. This is more like somebody like um, uh, Moshe Postone. He is like this value form theorist. So for him, like you have capitalism as soon as you have you're calculating abstract value quantitatively and planning based on that. So, and you're still paying wages. So even if you like all owned a co-op, it still has to run on the logic of like a capitalist firm, because if you don't turn a profit, you still go under. It's not sustainable.
Well, it still floats within the global capitalist system.
Right.
So then that
it's
goes
not
back
if
to,
you try to be an isolated island in that, then it sort of inevitably kind of like recuperates what you're trying to do, and causes you to act based on the incentivized logic of maximizing return on investment of abstract value. So as opposed to like if you planned like your needs and plan the amount of like time and energy you would put in those as separate qualitative things, like first, like you're prioritizing certain things, like everyone's fed, or that's already operating on a different kind of logic than just we need to make a return on investment.
Okay.
So I don't know. Like we're getting kind of in the weeds of
but
technical terms, but I guess
it's
I'm
interesting.
Trying to,
So do you know? Are you familiar at all with Isaiah Berlin's two concepts of liberty? Okay, so basically, to summarize it real briefly, it was basically the idea would be like negative freedom versus positive freedom. Negative freedom would be don't take things away from me, don't infringe on my space. There's like we both have a bubble in which we can't cross into each other's rights, but and then the positive sense of freedom is has less to do with about who rules you and more to do with what the services that they're giving you are, right? Like, so it would be more like a monarchic system, right? Because negative freedom is considered somewhat of a new concept, because privacy, prima nocte, I'm sure is not an exciting concept to anybody who's married. But so what I always find interesting about the US is that we're in a space where we have very much this concept of negative freedom, and at the same time we're losing privacy at this really fast rate.
Yeah.
Which
shouldn't, like, if you have this individualistic idea of negative freedom, that should be protected on paper at all costs, right? But it's being eroded really quickly. Yeah. I think that just shows that, I mean, that's a good segue, because one thing that is different about Bordiga than other critics of Stalinism say is it wasn't so much based on, like, Lenin had this idea of democratic centralism, which is how the party was supposed to run. Like, if you were part of the party, like they didn't allow competing non-worker parties in that would be in their own terms to have a say in the USSR. Like they I forget what the parties were in 1917, but like you had like the Mensheviks and like the various like parties that wanted to stay in World War I and stuff. And they obviously didn't. There wasn't like this open, free competition between different political parties in the USSR. Like they quickly reduced the number down to like a few token ones and one that actually ruled. Yeah. But within the party, Lenin had this idea that as long as you were part of the party, there should be like a give and take between the center and the base, and he called that democratic centralism. And they still, had votes, to see who would be like officials or whatever. But Bordiga was really critical of the idea of democracy itself, and he had this idea of like what he called organic centralism, which was based on like kind of keeping central tenets of the party's philosophy intact without drifting off into what he considered opportunism. You know what I mean? Like, and there were.
What party could that be? Could that describe in the present day?
Yeah. But like, he was really against any like united fronts. That was a big thing in the 30s, because I guess, I mean, a lot of Soviet history to me, after Lenin's gone, or even before, Lenin really believed that Germany was going to have a successful communist revolution, and they would link kind of with the Soviet wave. And he thought that, Russia and that area that became part of the Soviet Union that was beyond just Russia, but he thought that would be maybe fourth or eighth in importance in world revolutionary events in his lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
Like he expected the main thrust of it to be the most industrialized parts of the world, which is also what Marx predicted.
And
It didn't really turn out that way. Like that would have been like Germany and kind of England, but Marx and Engels had at times would be critical of England because they thought maybe the workers were given so many reforms and placated there by like a kind of the fruits of imperialism that they would maybe not be revolutionary, which turned out to be true. I don't know if that's the only reason, but I mean that kind of was true everywhere. Like Germany had the biggest socialist party in Europe, and when World War I came around, it completely did an about face on its stance on war and supported World War One, which was complete abandonment of internationalism.
Yeah.
It was Lenin's idea was that this idea of revolutionary defeatism, like you didn't support your own government in a war unless it was a dictatorship of the proletariat. Like you know what I mean? Like that was.
What's a dictatorship of the like that seems like an oxymoron because I don't understand the term.
Well, the way Marx used it, his model for that was the Paris Commune.
Okay.
So in 1871 in Paris, the workers took over the whole city of Paris, and they ran it through workers' councils. So it would be like I guess you would call that like direct democracy nowadays. That would each,
as opposed to representative.
Yeah, I mean they would be like a series of tiered councils where everyone would start off in one and in your workplace or your local area or wherever, and you would make decisions. And instead of a representative, each one of those would send a delegate to a higher tier councils. And those delegates were, unlike representatives, they were recallable at any point in time, like immediately. And they weren't there they were just there to sort of relay the decisions that the lower tier
agency.
Council was making. Yeah. So it was very like bottom up, like, structure of direct democracy that by the time you got to the central council, it was all made up of delegates from the other councils. So
how big was the Paris Commune?
It was basically the whole city. It was during a war between, I think Prussia and France. And the French bourgeoisie had already kind of more or less surrendered. And the city of Paris was like, fuck that, you're not going to take us over.
Why does so much of this shit sound so familiar?
And so they took over Paris and held it for a few months. And then finally the French government came in and like helped the Prussians slaughter all the communards, the workers who were part of the workers' councils.
Okay.
So it ended in a bloodbath. But for Marx, that was the so far best example of like how his preferred system would work.
Okay.
Which is very unlike any of the 20th century, like, quote unquote, communist states, how they ran.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is that, like, capital is so corrupting, right? So it would
capitalism doesn't like a vacuum. It finds a way in really quickly if there's any kind of
well, it's just so easy I mean, like, you could just, all you have to do is set a couple of people, right? Like, you don't have to buy everybody. That's what is so powerful about it.
Yeah.
Right.
Or and things are made globally now, even more so than when all this was first theorized. There's a theoretical group called Theorie Communiste, something like that. It's French, and they have this idea called the glass floor, where it's the basic idea is like it's hard to even seize means of production locally because everything is manufactured globally. And what do like
Mm-hmm.
if you're making things in France, say, but the product is like from a cobalt mine in Africa and it's like partially assembled somewhere else, then like in order to seize the means of production, you're going to have to like have a whole supply chain basically that you would seize. And it's really like there's currently no internationalist or international labor movement. And there's maybe hints of it here and there every once in a while, a little bit, but it hasn't been organized. Like labor isn't.
The flip side of that's interesting though is when you go into places like Venezuela and you see how like people treat. Have you seen the videos of Juan Guaido like having his clothes ripped off of him by like and fucking where it's like that guy? I don't know what the fuck the incentive was for that guy to be that guy, but that guy is fucked. Because now we need
Silver
their
lining,
oil.
right?
I mean, I don't wish anyone any like. He's a fucking puppet. Like it's. I don't get excited for his suffering. I want the fucking people responsible.
Right.
But it is crazy to just see that, right? Like where it's like when you're outside of the sheen of like the American imperialist sort of thing, and you actually get a look at like Pelosi. Someone asked her something, and then she goes, "Who?" about Guaido.
Oh God.
She goes like, "What about? Do you guys still recognize Juan Guaido? Is he going to be at the? I would think it was like with the thing in the Council of the Americas that was just a shit show because no one showed up." But yeah, it's fucking hilarious. Because I mean, that is my experience of like all of this stuff. I don't know like the Russian origins. I know shit dick about Lenin, and so to me this is all interesting.
I mean, in some ways, I think there's a limited use in trying to go back to like the early 20th century and pinpoint like this is the place where it went off the rails.
Oh no, I don't think I didn't feel like that's what you were doing. I think this is more like
part of me has a urge to do that all the time. Okay. So I have to.
I like to go back there because that's when shit was like crazy, weird, utopian. And like I think that like you look at like the fucking communes in this country from like the 60s, and then like you go like farther back and you think about how fucking crazy those are probably.
Yeah.
And like there were some. I like cults. I mean, I don't like them.
Yeah,
but
they're interesting.
Interesting, and there's like there is a level of groupthink when you're trying to break from something. And not that a commune is automatically a cult, but they do have that term "new religion" sometimes, which anybody that uses that is a fucking cult.
Like as far as the U.S. has a long history of religious communes.
Yeah,
I mean, even before there was such a thing as Marxism, there was a communist movement in the United States, and they were mostly religious. They were mostly from Germany. You had people like Onida and Amana were like compounds. They actually were so successful that they became corporations, and they still exist today. Amana makes refrigerators, and Onida makes cutlery. But they were religious communes from Germany. I think they were both from Germany in the like mid 1800s.
There's a huge Spanish company too, I think, that is also a commune that is
Mondragon or something.
Maybe, I don't know. You would probably know better than me. I just know I can hear Richard Wolf's. Now you gotta. I can't even fucking do it. It's so off.
I mean, I think that's kind of like a co-op. Like to me, that's still it's an attempt to be a more fair capitalist enterprise, which. I mean, given the choice between that and like just full throttle like exploitation, sure, why not? But I don't.
Well, but that's interesting because I bring up what's his name, Richard Wolff, because he does talk a little bit about how like the reanalysis. He touches a little bit about what you said about how it was just state capitalism, right? If you're isolated. And so he says that now people are going back and reinterpreting or reanalyzing Marxism, being like, this is what he actually meant. But maybe I'm misremembering he focused it a little bit more on worker co-ops, and that's actually how I heard about that Spanish company.
Mm.
So it sounds like you feel like that's actually still within the capitalist system as opposed to
Yeah, and it's understandable why that would be desirable, because if you can, if your only two options are to be a capitalist or be exploited by one, most people would rather be the capitalist, even
And
if
you're
it's
saying-
like a cooperative group form
Yeah.
of that.
Okay.
You know, like at least you're benefiting off of your own labor more. But Marx was really critical of this guy LaSalle, whose whole political
that shit
thrust
triggers
of his
LaSalle. I don't know why, but that's a fucking huge Cuban name.
but his whole thing was he wanted to have everyone be paid equally for their work.
Okay.
And which makes some intuitive sense, but Marx was really mercilessly made fun of him because for various reasons, like just the idea that you wouldn't have any surplus value, you couldn't even like make roads or grow a firm. Like if you still had the firm, you still had the company structure, you can't. I don't know. I probably shouldn't go into the weeds of this because it's like nitpicking, but yeah, I mean, I don't think.
So then, what do you think a true socialist? Sorry, before let me ask a question. You can work it in.
Yeah.
What do you think a true socialist system would look like today?
I guess like the best. If you're going,
are we adding the French the Paris compound?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that was also isolated and surrounded by hostile forces, and to some degree, I think even Bordiga conceded that a dictatorship of the proletariat locally, like in a single country, would probably have to engage in some kind of like state capitalist venture and tread water until it was able to link up with a larger wave of world revolution. So in some ways, it's like it's less about like blaming a particular figurehead for how things turn out than just acknowledging that is what happens when you attempt such a thing as like a paradoxical thing as socialism in one country.
It sort of sounds like to some extent though there has to be like, because like, okay, over here in this country we're obsessed with the concept of fascism, right? Like every kind of, it's almost like the only type of authoritarianism that we acknowledge, which is odd because we are fucking fascist, right? Like to some, well, I mean the way that we treat other countries.
I mean, I guess it depends how specifically historical you want to be about like what that term means. I mean, if it's just
in terms of
kind of belligerent warlike capitalism that trods over people's.
Well, I mean, I would say neoliberalism is intrinsically right wing, right? And then and so I think that if you look at sort of specifically Italian fascism, how it came about, it was because of the liberals were just fucking feckless assholes. That it was, they were neoliberals at the time too, and they just fucking conceded. Like there was violence and whatnot, but at the same time, like we had a similar, like we're very much on that precipice. So I understand people's anxiety about it, but if you actually like talk to somebody about their imperialist tendencies in this country, there is a huge ultra nationalist sentiment, which is like specifically like not just nationalism, but like everybody got to fucking play by America rules, right? That is intrinsically fascist. That like I would definitely say that. So maybe specifically in terms like we don't have like a dictator, you know, in terms like that, but in you know, like fucking.
Yeah, I guess the term dictatorship of the proletariat's tricky because people are like, it's a dictatorship, and it's basically what Marx thought was that all states were some sort of class dictatorship. So I would say like every country in the world today probably is a class dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. Every capitalist country is a class dictatorship.
Did you ever hear Mussolini, like once he got really, because I know, and there was like a period where he was not not aloof to the Nazis because they were fucking neighbors, but he wasn't. They were like he wasn't bringing in concentration camps and whatnot.
Yeah, well, I mean, Italian fascism wasn't explicitly based on like a racist ideology in the same way that Nazism was. I mean, they had people
they were still fucking racist. Let's be clear. There were still some like because there were ghettos and whatnot. Like we don't want to full erasure, but the main thrust I think was more of this imperialist attitude of if you go like I've tell this a lot, but when you go to Stadio Olimpico in Italy, in Rome, which was, I don't know if they still play there, but Roma, because I think they were changing stadiums, but Roma used to play there. And you go in there and it's part of this complex that Mussolini built, and it has all these mosaics on the floor of Ethiopia, which is a country that had never been fucking conquered, but like one of the only African countries. And then, they're celebrating the fact that they conquered, with tanks and airplanes, all of that, like typical fascist architecture leading into this stadium. And when he talks about like the American system, and please be careful with what I'm about to say, because I'm not saying I am for fascism, okay? But his analysis as he's giving a speech to the Nazis, once they took the bad turn and they started to have the fucking concentration camps, and they were like, because like the Nazis had to bail fucking Italy out of Eritrea, or not Eritrea, out of Ethiopia, because they were not fucking engineers and their tanks were shit, right? They had aspirations to fucking be this like modern country, which is why I really like the Futurists as a point of reference, because they just show how fucking naive. You got Marinetti talking about like drinking ditch water from like that has run off from a factory, and and he's like, oh, we should drink this will make us stronger, like right, like just this fucking complete naive nationalist thing. But yeah, when you listen to his analysis, like he's like he calls it a plutocracy. He calls the United States a plutocracy. And there is something interesting about the fact that these other countries already had their empire, right? Like the British Empire was already a thing, right? So these countries, like if you listen to like they're like, we want to be like everybody else, which is fucked up,
right? Yeah. One of the most controversial things about Bordiga was that he took a revolutionary defeatist stance in World War II. Yeah, which a lot of people were like, that's too far. Like like for him, the Soviet Union calling for like united fronts that worked with bourgeois parties, that worked with like liberal parties and social democrats, like that was already opportunism for him. Yeah, like you weren't supposed to do any class collaboration, which is another reason why a lot of like he's part of kind of like the left communist current, which there was there's that Lenin's pamphlet from one of the congresses of the Third International called Left-Wing Communism, Infantile Disorder, where he kind of calls out different people, and it's like Anton Pannekoek from, I'm probably going to butcher all these names, from the Netherlands, I think he was from, and Hermann Gorder was like a German left communist, and he briefly mentions like Bordiga in that, but he actually praises him because he says he's better than Togliatti, who was like another.
What happened to him after he got taken out of the? What was it that he got replaced by that other guy?
Yeah, he got replaced by Antonio Gramsci.
From what?
He was also, they were both part of the Italian Communist Party.
So
Moscow, word from Moscow came down, basically the Third International, the Comintern was, it was created to be the kind of nerve center of the world communist movement and to kind of lead a world revolutionary wave, right? You had the First International that Marx was part of, and then the Second International that he kind of split with what he called utopian socialism. And then the Third International was the one that Lenin was instrumental in building. And so the point of that was to be, again, Lenin's idea of like democratic centralism was supposed to have input from all of the communist parties of the world in order to lead a world revolution. That was the idea of it. and the Comintern was disbanded. It was dissolved, I think, during World War II or shortly after by Stalin, and some people argue that it was mostly to appease the Allied forces, to appease Roosevelt, Churchill, because those were, Russia's or USSR's allies at that time, which basically put a stake in the heart of the entire, having a body that would be where all the communist parties of the world centralized.
Yeah.
So like, if you were interested in like an international world revolution, dissolving the Comintern would be like the absolute last thing you would want to do. But yet, I mean, by that time it was already being used as like instead of Bordiga thought that the Soviet Union and any isolated aspiring dictatorship of the proletariat that was supposed to be part of a revolutionary wave, he thought that the Comintern should be the main authoritative body of that, not the party of that country, but so the entire Comintern would run the USSR, which is, if you think about a world where that would have happened, that's a very different way of conceiving of like what the World Communist Party's role were to enacting in concert.
So then so let me paraphrase to see if I understand. So it sounds like what you're saying is that, let's use states and federal as an analogy. Is that what we're talking about? Like sort of like decentralizing the power of party, or centralizing the power of the parties, but having a one authority. So like all these countries respond to that council?
Yeah, well, they would all have input into it.
Okay.
So as opposed to what happened was that the USSR to Bordiga became like basically a Russian nationalist project. And things came from Moscow out. And I mean, that's what happened to him. He had the popular majority of his own local Italian Communist Party, and yet Moscow was able to sort of by fiat just replace him against the wishes of the bulk of his party, which is.
But what you're saying is that the ideal would have been the other way around. Now he would go into the council and then change the council that
like think
had
about
the authority to change him.
Yeah, and Bordiga was even critical of even democratic centralism. Like he kind of didn't really care about the idea of even democracy itself, which is highly controversial even among like communists. So but he was pretty hardline in that way. But interestingly, his preferred like structure would have been more democratic than having the central committee of the Soviet Union's Politburo determine policy for the entire world communist parties, and even force them to do things that he thought were already opportunism, like forcing them to be in united fronts with liberal parties and social democratic parties. Like to Bordiga, that was already like opportunism, and you're losing the thread of like what you're trying to do, because
in terms of that influence, right? That top-down influence. How big?
It's tricky though, because like when you say top-down or decentralized, that's not quite it, because the Comintern was still supposed to be
I know, but how it actually played out, like the reality. So like how big? Because obviously the Soviet bloc was rather large, but then there were other, there's Cuba,
right,
and there's other countries like that, right, where we're overthrowing dictatorships, quote unquote. If you can't see the.
Wait, who is?
The U.S.
Oh, okay.
In Latin America.
Right.
Yeah, like
air quotes.
Dictatorships, and
I mean they were arguably anyway. I mean I think most of as soon as you have this idea that you're building socialism in one country, there wasn't a lot of room for alternate models in the 20th century. Like that sort of became the rubber stamp that everything, and they all became kind of like nationalist projects in a way. You know what
No,
I
they were
mean?
definitely not. But more than my question is like, okay, we're in this country. We think of like, and to some degree, what you're describing, it does sound like ultimately not necessarily world domination through like force, even though it does look like Russia was not against that with things like the war in Afghanistan and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
But the how what percentage of the world, because I know that there was like Jakarta was all there's it's almost like, okay, I think it was the guy from Jakarta who came up with the term third world. And
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't supposed to be a negative, right?
Yeah.
It was supposed to be a third alternative to the bipolar world, the US, Russia, and then the third world was supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's like this book called The Jakarta Method. I've seen Glenn Greenwald interview the guy that wrote it.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically our fucking foreign policy playbook is entirely based on that. I don't know if you've seen the movie The Act of Killing, but that's basically about the horrible shit that people did to fight communism
Mm-hmm.
through CIA, whatever. They don't. It doesn't cover like American influence on that. It
Mm-hmm.
just kind of talks about like the movie itself. Just kind of talks. It's an interesting thing where he's just making a documentary retelling these people's stories, and as they tell the story, they realize that they are fucking monsters, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like, and so it's so that's more what it seems like there was a separate something separate that was leftist, maybe not even dictatorship in the South Pacific. I mean I don't expect you to know the difference between the second and third world in this context, right? But it does seem like there was a subset of countries that felt like they were getting behind
Mm-hmm.
and getting left behind and started to like take some of their own sovereignty into their own, and maybe try to like do stupid shit, stupid destructive things like nationalize their own fucking natural resources and whatnot. I mean, I'm assuming that that's some shit that happened in Jakarta because that's pretty much the main reason that we get involved in these things, other than
Mm-hmm.
just to not make sure that there are no leftist countries.
Yeah, I mean, the U.S. foreign policy is just basically to make the world safe for its own economic interest, right? I mean, that's
Well, I mean, not
that's
anymore.
yeah, right. But I mean, I
That's an
guess
interesting one actually, because the chess game is fucking. We're so repetitive with our fucking moves that Russia was just like, fuck you.
yeah,
You're buying shit in
yeah.
in rubles now.
I guess that comes back to like what is imperialism? Like Lenin described imperialism as, again, like a world system. It wasn't so much that like the winning countries are imperialists, because like you look at World War One, it's not that the forces at play there were all imperialist. You
Yeah,
know what I
well,
mean?
yeah,
Like
yeah.
there were like it's not like the
It's varying
underdogs,
degrees of imperialism. That's what
right?
the fucking the fascists were trying to catch up.
Right. They were the underdog imperialists who were
Yeah,
aspiring to be imperialists,
yeah.
and so it, imperialism to me is just the dynamic that happens inevitably when capitalist nation states compete. It's right,
But that's where I'm getting
but
because
there's a kind of a different idea of what imperialism is, which is kind of departs from Lenin, which is that some countries have an imperialist relation to other countries that are also capitalist, which is kind of like, yeah, there's an unequal exchange between countries, right? Some countries seem to be client states of another, or
Mhm.
whatever. Like there's this idea that there's a whole branch of kind of communist thought called third worldism that is like, you know, analyzes. They would be attached to this idea of like that there's a labor aristocracy, like that workers in the first world, say, are participate and benefit from imperialism in their sense of the word, and it sort of precludes any real internationalist cooperation between workers in the first world and in the third world. I think that's kind of like a little bit disastrous because
Yeah, but then you for that. So like that's where you get into the fact that like nation states no longer are like nation states are slowly becoming more and more prisons rather than like a country that provides you services, right?
Yeah, if they ever were really meant to be that in the first
Yeah.
place, you know.
Yeah.
Or and you know, I guess most of the left communist tradition is critical of would be critical of third worldism and critical of like, you know, Rosa Luxemburg, I guess, was a lot more critical than even Lenin was about like what is the role of like national liberation movements and things like that, because and a lot of like modern day left communism would also be critical of that, because the idea that you would critically support like an underdog capitalist country or even state capitalist country with red flag because they're supposedly anti-imperialist. It's like, no, they're also bound by the logic of imperialism to compete in this kind of like world stage.
So then maybe
And it's kind of like a game of musical chairs to nowhere.
so then the distinction might be more of a militaristic imperialism versus an economic imperialism.
Well, the way Lenin thought of imperialism was that it used debt and lending of capital as opposed to
Yeah, but that's not what's happening now in this country necessarily. Like now, what it is it's just money going to like literally all of our money goes to the military industrial complex upwards, right? Like that, or you know, or other industries. It's just a squeeze. Like we pay taxes not to get services. We pay taxes. Like I mean, I would be very happy. I mean, I pay taxes, but I'm saying like I would be more excited if I got shit out of it. But really, like if you look at what happened with COVID and 19, that was a fucking massive giveaway. They shut down people's businesses. People like that was like a fucking hollowing out of the economy, sending money directly upwards.
Yeah.
So I think maybe that might be, you know, and this is just me talking shit, but maybe that might be, you might be onto something there in the sense that like maybe that's why we're starting to fall apart. Because if you look at countries like China, what they're actually doing is what Microsoft used to do, which is give away their shit so that you're locked in. You know,
or the way that they, what they're doing in Africa is kind of like the Marshall Plan was after, like they're giving very low or zero.
But I think people are being able to pay those off a little bit easier than the Marshall Plan. That's why I was like,
maybe, but like the principle is the same. Like you're lending to in order to.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that's interesting about China is that though they are very repressive, there seems to be a lot of people that have gotten out of fucking poverty in an insane way, which is to say that maybe there's something to the fact that all manufacturing went over there.
Yeah, I mean it's capitalism. China right now is capitalism in a growth phase.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. Which is why they don't have to be as militaristically aggressive, because they have like Germany in before World War II. You know, one of the main Nazi talking points was like Lebensraum, right? They needed to expand because they didn't have a lot of space, and they were already developed as they were going to be. But in order to compete on this world stage of inner imperialist conflict, they had to expand.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, China has like a sixth of the world population, and it's still, even after a few decades of like after Deng Xiaoping, it's still expanding industrially. Mm-hmm. Although that like there's,
and we're just becoming more and more of a service economy.
I mean, China even has rust belts now, though.
Yeah,
like because they're now starting to, industry there is starting to be outsourced to like other places. You know what I mean, like surrounding countries. So it's China's not even. It's impossible to call China like the third world even anymore.
Oh no,
it's not like not even close. So
I don't actually know that I just always saw them as really isolationist. You know, like my dad told me that when he went, they didn't speak English. Like when he would do it because he worked for the UN. When he would travel over there, he would have to have like someone write down the name of the hotel, and that like he wouldn't even talk because there was just like that's how much of a gap there was. This is in the 80s, obviously, which is around when fucking normalized relations became finally normalized. So
Yeah.
I guess that's like 40 years now.
Yeah.
You know?
I guess, I mean, I think a lot of 20th century movements that called themselves communist movements were, in retrospect, and often despite the intentions of the participants, what they really were like developmental regimes to very quickly industrialize fast enough to keep pace and to not be taken over by a stronger imperialist power.
Yeah.
I mean, that's basically, it's like most of those places had some kind of rudimentary capitalist production already, like Russia did. But, Russia and China were obviously vastly majority peasant countries when they had their revolutions, right? They weren't, there wasn't even like much of a proper urban proletariat in those countries, but yet they're using Marx as a supposed like inspiration, but they were like the least likely places to Marx where revolution was going to break out because they didn't even have a proletariat yet.
Yeah.
Like they basically created a proletariat in those countries on a massive scale that didn't exist before.
Those countries, just China or any other country?
Yeah, Soviet Union, China, Cuba.
Oh, you mean all
aspiring
communists?
Almost all of the 20th century communist movements.
Well, yeah, that is
started.
one of the fucking ridiculous things that they try to do, and now that makes sense. Like they try to, because Cuba's economy is like sugarcane and shit like that, and they really wanted to fucking industrialize, and that was a very, very bad ambition because they just weren't able to fucking do it ever.
I mean, it's understandable in a way because
it's tied to the ideology.
If you don't do that, then someone's going to take you over, and you're going to be like, it's not like, it's understandable why that happened, but the question is like, how much does it have to do with a path toward a communist world? Like,
well, that's
to me, it's not that much.
This whole conversation is just kind of difficult. It's like one of those like fucking koans, because it's like how do you do that with like, there's a couple of things. First of all, I was always like, or part of me is very much of the mind that the Soviet Union threat was fucking massively overstated by the U.S. They were never really a danger to us and all of that shit.
They almost went out of their way to be friendly.
Yeah.
Like the fact that Stalin did dissolve the Comintern was like this massive gesture of like almost ass kissing Churchill and Roosevelt, but and still like they were still like the Red Menace. You know what I mean? Like
it does kind of make me understand a little bit, because ideologically, essentially, it is very it's, even in the most idealist sense, it's so anti-capitalist, right? Like there doesn't seem to be room, like if you want to be fucking part of the bourgeoisie, it's terrifying as far as an ideology, right?
Yeah, because it's coming for your neck if you're or I mean,
and global, like in speaking in terms of not the nationalist, like speaking in terms of the upwards dictatorship, or the what's it called, dictatorship of the proletariat, which I still don't know how the fuck you would make that work. I
mean, I guess that's just the.
You would have to kill all the capitalists. And then what do you make then? Then you become authoritarian in this really fucking weird way. I know you're okay with it.
Well, I mean, there's at a certain point, you have to wonder what is in anyone's interest. Like, is it even in, like, if capitalism is literally going to destroy a livable environment for people to live in, is it really even in anyone's interest to keep it going? I mean, like Frederick Engels was a factory owner. And he was like a class trader in a good way. Like he was able to act in a way that attempted to make a better world. And I'm not like, the question of like violence and achieving things. I mean,
in terms of incentives, though, like
I don't think the working class ever started a class war. There's always a class war going on. Economics is war by other means. So it's like, do you have self-defense, or are you just going to be like squashed by the current state of the world, I guess. I mean, to me, it's like class conflict is
But I think that
is inherently self-defense for
oh no, I'm not
yeah.
against I'm not against people rising up and murdering, like,
in Minecraft, you mean?
no,
Not in the real world.
just
For legal reasons.
in some conceptual like space where it like when the Democrats are okay with it, that's when I'm okay with it. How about that? that should get me by with YouTube.
Yeah.
No, what I'm not like. Look, dude, that's all rhetorical anyway, because the idea of fucking murdering someone for me is so difficult.
Well,
I mean, so just to be clear,
yeah.
like, we do not condone murder, and if someone fucking murdered anyone because of something I said, I would feel awful. That's not, but in the terms of like rising up the proletariat, like, I don't have a conceptual problem with the French Revolution. Right.
I mean, I wouldn't even be that worried today as a capitalist, because there is no there's no coherent world workers movement in existence right now. You might as well admit that there isn't, because we have to start from at least looking at the world from a truthful place. And it's,
you saw that we're allowed to be propagandized by our own government now, right? Since 2011. I just recently, a story broke. I forget the details, so I'm sorry I bring it up without being able to point you to the exact article, but it's pretty valid. And basically, like, Obama in 2011, up until then, there had been a law that you could propagandize foreign governments, foreign countries. You could perform propaganda over there. And after 2011, that has been not the case, which makes sense, because if you look at how fucking social media has been run in that last decade, and how it gets tighter and tighter, it's insane.
Yeah.
But that just kind of makes me feel like when the oligarchy can no longer like take money from other people outside, right? Like, because basically this whole war is about selling liquid gas. The thing with Ukraine, about us selling liquid gas. It's the same thing with Syria. It's about a fucking pipeline. It's all about energy, right? What I don't understand, and I've never seen before, is how, and they must know something that I don't, is how they're just dismantling American polar hegemony by going after this. They must think that there's something to gain after fucking with Russia to the extent that they are, because obviously Ukraine is not going to win this war. They just don't have the resources to do it. They don't have the will. I have to be careful what I say, but I'm going to only talk about the economics of the situation so that we don't have to talk about the politics of it. And I'm in no way endorsing Putin. I'm just talking about how stupid America has been in its doing this. So basically, we seized some assets once Vladimir Putin invaded, and some people have asked, like, didn't he expect that shit to happen? And he did. So once that happened, he was able to say, okay, we're no longer accepting gas money for gas in dollars, which is hugely destabilizing, which is which is one of the main driving forces in inflation, and one of the main driving forces in prices of going. You think that what people in this country don't understand is that most of the world pays these gas prices, pays like fucking $8, like insane. The gas is so insane that when I was a kid, the UN used to give my dad coupons to pay for the fucking gas, because the gas is so expensive in Italy. And a side note, there was a brand called Q, the letter Q and the number 8 when I was a kid, and during the Iraq War. So that stuck in my mind. But basically, the reason that the U.S. is so powerful, and we get to decide terms and we get to sanction people, is because, and I'm sure you know this. I don't mean to condescend, just to kind of talk about the whole thing, is because we are Saudi Arabia's military. We are willing to do whatever the fuck Saudi Arabia wants. We're doing it right now in Yemen. And in return, the Saudis make everyone buy shit in oil. Now we've been talking so much shit about these guys because of because of Khashoggi and all of this stuff, and now we're getting fucked. Now, like, it has been the most belligerent, incompetent economic policy, foreign policy that I've ever seen any fucking, like, in terms of, and I know this motherfucker is senile, but that's not an excuse. You know, like this is maybe the biggest fuck up in our lifetimes that we may not, like, this is not the 2008 stock market crash. This is realigning countries. This is forcing China and Russia to establish relationships.
Yeah.
You know, and the Italians are buying shit in rubles. It's fucking crazy. It is the most insane shit. Like, so I don't even really, what is happening, it's either they don't know what the fuck they're doing, or it's worse and they know what the fuck they're doing, and I don't know where it's going.
Yeah, I mean, it's the geopolitics is the merry-go-round to nowhere.
Yeah.
That is gonna. I mean, I think that world capitalism is going to produce all kinds of horrific crises. That's just what it does.
Yeah.
And the only like I know, like, there's a lot of leftist organizations that will basically, their idea of anti-imperialism is they will support anyone that is against NATO, no matter what. I mean, you know, it's almost kind of like there's, if you look at what Lenin was saying during World War I, and like the idea of revolutionary defeatism, like the workers have no country, like no capitalist nation state is ever going to really solve the basic contradictions of capitalism for you. It's never going to, I mean, that's just absurd to hope that would happen. And as long as there's nation states competing over limited resources, it's always going to incentivize war and you know, competition, exploitation, all that. So it seems absurd. Like, there's communists, quote unquote, who will support Putin currently because at least he's against NATO, and you have to, like, pick a side. And it's like, if it was World War I, would you be saying that about, like, Tsar Nicholas? It's almost kind of the same situation. Like, Russia is not an anti-imperialist country; it's an underdog imperialist country.
Yeah.
Every country participates in imperialism. Some are just temporarily more successful in it than others.
I agree with that. The one distinction I would make is that, and I'm not apologizing for Putin. This is maybe more related to China, I would say, especially because you can't really say that he's not militaristic when he's literally fucking invading somebody. But by comparison, who has the fucking biggest military? And so I know that I tend to conflate in this conversation imperialism with militarism, right? Whereas that is not the exclusive way to refer to imperialism, right? I definitely acknowledge that. However, in terms of the goodwill, like in terms of international PR, I mean, it's really fucking crazy when you have, like, you know, the fucking African nations at the UN saying that, like, we should fucking just negotiate with Putin because it's fucking them, you know?
Yeah. I mean, it's, geopolitics is always going to be like this circus of absurd decisions, as long as there's not.
So you don't have a solution?
No, I mean, I would, not to sound like a broken record, but I think, like, we should be aspiring to an actual state where revolutionary defeatism could be revolutionary. Like, there would be such a thing. Like, everything, to me, it's just, all these examples are why there desperately needs to actually be a functional international workers movement, where there's communication between workers in different countries, there's coordinated. I think there was just something that happened about, like, equalizing wages across like supply chain in different countries, because, you know, wherever you are, you have radically different That's one of the reasons why the workers' movement is on that's such a low ebb, is because you you can't bargain, because how can you bargain with international companies that can be like, well, yeah, we don't like the terms here anymore. Sorry, we're just going to go here.
Yeah.
Or we're going to automate you out of existence or whatever. I mean,
and the other challenge is, I remember when I was first in community college, and there was a discussion. It was back in the early 2000s, so it was around the time where everybody was talking about sweatshops, right? And how people were making like cents on the dollar. And there was this guy who was an immigrant from, I forget exactly where, but somewhere in Latin America. And he was actually defending that because it was letting people live well, right? Because the economic,
it's job creators.
It's job creators.
It's the logic of capital, because it's the only game in town.
But that is, I think that's what makes it so like, dude, you can fight your whole life and die starving, or you can just fucking, if you can't beat them, join them, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's hard to fucking argue with someone when it comes to their fucking, like, it really, like, conceptually, yeah, morally, blah blah blah, but it really is just a fucking, it's not pragmatic, it's not
yeah, it's sad. It turns everything into a zero-sum game between workers that we would compete for the crumbs from the table. You know what I mean? Like,
it's like the fucking prisoner's dilemma, essentially, right? Like, if I don't do it, they're gonna go to somebody else, and I'm gonna get fucked. I might as well be the one. And if I'm the one, at least I can change the system from the inside.
There's a kind of like an interesting homology between.
I don't know that word.
Homology is like a similar shape at a different scale or a different context.
I know that as fractal.
Yeah, yeah. So like, it's funny because there are like communist or socialist parties that are like really critical of like U.S. Democrats. Like they're like would never associate with them or whatever, and they make fun of this like vote blue no matter who, because it's like, why? What do we get out of that? But which is true. It's a valid criticism. But on a kind of higher level, there's an irony, because these same parties would basically say like, and critically support anti-imperialist country no matter who.
Yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean? Even if it's like a religious,
like what you were saying
theocracy,
about,
or if it's Putin. Like, Putin promised that he would like decommunize the parts of Ukraine and there's still communist parties that are like, well, Putin is at least not NATO. It's like, he promised to decommunize you. Like, why do you have this masochism where it's like
the fact that I don't like Donald Trump, and I think he's kind of gross, but there's just so much enjoyment I get from watching people to fucking freak out over him.
Well, it's so he's got easy targets.
Yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Whether it's like,
that's the mill coming in.
Whether it's the Marco Rubio or Hillary Clinton or whatever. I mean, it's all like a clown show. So he's just the only one who's willing to make that explicit, which is sad. But like, at least there's occasional humor in it, I guess.
I just thought of something too, and I don't know if this is like legit or anything. This is just, but I feel like this sort of tokenism that is like supposed to work for like work for minorities and stuff. A lot of Latinos voted for Trump. Everybody knows that, right? And a lot of Latinos were also supporting Bernie. And to me, I always think of people like Marco Rubio as like, it's like when someone's like, oh, we just elected the first black this and that. And I'm like, the first, and actually someone recently said that, and it was like, and they were like, the first black Supreme Court justice. I'm like, bro, that was Thurgood Marshall. Shut the fuck up. Like, people are just getting this weird boner for this shit. But like, man, I feel like Latinos have had such bad representation for so much that you're just like, the whole democratic message is just like, meanwhile everybody's like, we're trying to protect brown people, and like the brown people are like, shut the fuck up.
I mean, yeah, I don't know. I wonder how much longer the Democratic Party can go on with nothing to show for itself. I don't know. I don't understand like what's supposed to like keep motivating people to like slam their hand in that car door over and over again.
I used to be full of rage over it, and now I just acknowledge that everybody's propagandized, and that I, to some extent, probably still am, and don't see those blind spots, Yeah. And that kind of helps me not fucking rage at people, and then I can enjoy like the idiot. That's the other thing, dude. Man, I'm not a fan of like right-wing people, but I grew up around a lot of them because I grew up in Miami and I'm Cuban, so like there's a lot of family like there. But at some point after George W. Bush, maybe during the Obama years, there came a turn, and then during the Trump years, I really get a kick out of right-wing people shitting on libs. Like it doesn't matter who shits on a limb. If it's a good point, I'm like, fuck yeah. Whereas it used to be like, oh no, that's coming from that point, that person, like, and I think that's a break in propaganda for me, where I was just like, nah, if someone makes a good point, it's a good point. Like watching fucking Rand Paul with Fauci, it's like one of the most entertaining fucking things where I'm like,
well, it's funny, we're on a podcast and there's a whole kind of phenomenon that with the dirtbag left that happened where it's like kind of exactly what you're saying, and it's gone to really strange places though.
Like who are you thinking of?
There's like Cumtown and Red Scare and those
and Chapo
podcasts.
Trap House.
Yeah, Chapo Trap House. I think Chapo ended up just kind of becoming like a DSA voice, right? I mean, which is still the Democratic Party. It's like,
I stopped listening to them after Bernie.
Yeah.
Because they were so into it. I don't know, and I still catch them on what's it called? The West Wing thing. Have you listened to that? That's not that's a little more shit libby. It straddles the line.
I like Red Scare had. I don't even know if they're. I mean, did you know that podcast? Mm-hmm. Like, they had Alex Jones on and Steve Bannon, and they didn't really challenge. I mean, they didn't challenge them much.
Yeah.
They had them on, and they were just kind of almost just amused that they were on there, and it was like novel just because they got this person to appear.
Yeah, and Tim Dillon had Candace Owens on.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that there's a like a Twitter personality. I think her name's like Amy Therese or something, and she's kind of started out as kind of like a Bernie like supporter, and is now just kind of full on like spitefully just embraces whatever like populist position, like she's I don't even know what she's on now. It's like
what do you think of the idea that that the Democrats are ceding populism to the right? I can elaborate.
Could be. I mean, I guess like a lot of the right talking points are populist to like small business owners. Like that's kind of their, you know what I mean? It's like it's populist, but not really. It's not like workers' populism necessarily, because small businesses are like petty bourgeois. They're not like, that's not a proletarian position to pander to. Right?
Well, I mean, this is a small business. I'm
sure.
Am I petty bourgeois? Yeah, I guess I am.
I mean, you're
actually, oh my God, I'm so called out.
So is this, just since you brought it up, like, I'm interested in this idea. Like, are you like making are you monetizing this? Are you like making a living off of doing this?
I'm trying to at this point.
Okay.
I mean, I have been making a little bit of money for like through the years, but not after 2020. We can maybe do this after. Yeah, and then just start wrapping up. But after 2020, during 2020, I wasn't asking for money because no one had work. Yeah. I stopped plugging the Patreon.
Right.
And then I've also lost like mad steam because I stopped for COVID and shit like that.
Yeah.
But I'm using the YouTube algorithm, so it should be faster this time. And shit like that. But no, I put an embarrassing amount of effort into this, like you did with Monta Vista.
Yeah, I mean that was a complete loss. Like I think it's interesting, like how people still like a lot of one of the main like talking points against any kind of like communist idea of the world is like, why would people do anything if they're not like,
because life is fucking boring.
yeah, because like I was like this kind of weirdo dissident surrealist like George Bataille, that guy.
No,
He was
actually the name rings a bell.
He was part of this
Maybe because it rhymes with Takai.
Maybe, yeah. He was like a surrealist writer who kind of like fell out with Andre Breton and like
okay,
did his own thing, like quit the official surrealist, and he wrote weird like kind of pornographic novels and philosophy tracts. But he had this idea that called like, he was really interested in this Northwest Native American ritual called the potlatch, where people like tribes would meet up and they would spend like the months before, it was like festival season kind of. So they would bring like, all these gifts. They would kind of try to competitively outdo their friendly other tribes with gifts giving. And it was almost like, if you didn't give as good of a gift, you would be kind of almost like shamed by that.
Oh wow.
And they would create these elaborate like copper plates that were decorative, and the whole purpose of them was to like throw them in the ocean in front of your rivals to like
be like, I got this much bling.
Yeah, like we had time to make this beautiful art. We're gonna throw it in the ocean. And like Bataille was really fascinated by that, and he had this idea of like useless expenditure.
Yeah.
Like he thought that he called it general economy, where it's economy usually is trying to economize and get the most out of like more efficient, more whatever. For him, he based his whole general economy on the fact that the sun gave off energy without return. Like it was like a pure gift that you could not return.
Yeah.
You can't give it back to the sun.
We tried to return it
earlier
today. It was fucking so hot. We're like, thank you, sun.
All life on Earth is, unless you're some weird obscure crab that lives off the heat vents of lava vents under the ocean, all of it is based on the sun's energy. If your plants, it's really direct.
Sun gods are like the most reasonable gods of all. And then you start thinking about it, you're like, oh, water gods too, because you fucking drown.
Yeah.
You lightning, thunder gods of thunder are important because of the harvest, and rain. Dude, it fucking thundered the other day, and I got scared. I'm from Florida. I was scared by thunder.
I heard that. That was crazy. I haven't heard anything like that.
It was wacky fucking weather. Loud, dude.
Yeah.
And you noticed it. So that's how bad it was, guys.
Yeah. But I mean, to me, like participating in Monavista projects, like I didn't make any money on that. It was a loss. Like my art, every once in a while I'll sell a painting, but overall it's a loss. I mean,
and that's the whole scene that I'm documenting.
That's a potlatch. It's a gift to the world that I don't really even expect a return on.
I don't know if I'm that benevolent with the podcast.
I mean, I can't help doing it. I can't not make art. You know what I mean? Even if I'm never compensated monetarily for it, it's not the point for me. It's like I just can't help doing this. It just comes out of me.
Well, that's why I like the idea of okay. The idea of universal basic income has its pitfalls, right? Obviously, because like, how do you protest the government that funds you? Looks like they're going to be able to cut off your money pretty soon anyway if they just don't like what you're saying, even without. So I don't know how good of an argument that is against universal basic income, but the idea of just having first of all, if everybody has enough to pay, and this is going back to that, this would be more in the positive sense of freedom thing, right? So if everybody has the ability to just pay their bills and feed themselves and stuff like that, first of all, they're probably not going to give a shit who's running the country as much, right? You're not that worried about that because your needs are taken care of. As opposed to like now where you can't worry about what's going on because you need to fucking take care of your needs. But the like, how many people, that's why in this country, that's why they gave us $12,000 and then $600. And who gave us less? Who gave us less?
Yeah, I mean, it's all almost all politics now is who do you have a dependency on? You know what I mean? It's not about like gaining power for like, humanity or whatever. It's about like who's going to represent you, who's going to infantilize you with the gifts that so you don't like rebel or whatever.
But like that's why when people in this country are like, "Oh, monarchy," I'm like, "Yo, sometimes people live well in monarchies, right?" Like,
yeah, I mean, well, that's the crazy part is
when
that,
the interregnum happened in the UK, people freaked the fuck out.
I mean, yeah, I'm not like a pro-monarchist, but the class division was less drastic under that. Like we have this formal freedom that ends up being not a freedom to really do anything with except aspire to join them, basically.
Well, I mean, how big of is the whole argument against the negative sense of freedom? I think is sort of the idea of like, to what extent does my bubble end and yours begin, right? And then you got people like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. Their bubbles are fucking huge, right? And they don't even have to try because they're almost like fucking demigods.
Their bubbles are like mech armor. Right?
Yeah. No, and not just that. Like, look, remember when fucking Steve Jobs died and they mourned him like he was a fucking monarch? Yeah. Like, people were like, "Oh my god!" Like, it's the same tendencies. It's just the different, like we got the Kardashians. It's over there, like over here, our figurehead and our head of state are the same person. Over there, they have, the monarch. Although at some one point it used to be the monarch was the figurehead and the head of state, right? Yeah. Like when you watch The Madness of King George, have you watched that? He's taking a piss and he goes, "Do it, England," because he refers to himself in the third person as England.
The royal we. His pronoun is we, capitalized. Right?
Yeah. So anyway, man, but so I do think that is an interesting thing where it's like people are very are maybe gonna, I don't know where the fuck is coming. I really, I've never been, the only thing I know is that the nation state is only going to cede more power to multinational corporations. And you've read Snow Crash, right?
It's useful to multinational corporations to have the populace broken up into nation states too, because it's like,
I just meant in terms of power and influence, not in terms of making. Yeah, that's why, that's going back to the thing where like your nation is your fucking prison, right? Because if they go, like, I would love to go to fucking some poor ass country and make 60 cents a dollar and live like a king. You get, or you like, and a lot of times that's what NGOs do. They'll send you and they'll pay you $100,000, and the people you work with, they don't get shit. And so even there's that crazy class divide that's internationalist. But
yeah. I mean, it's hopefully, I don't know. I think I'm seeing a little bit of like younger people kind of questioning, like, I guess what Mark Fisher called like capitalist realism, like when it's the only game in town. Like he's not the only person that talks about that, but like almost all politics is within the horizon of that. But that the horizon of like capitalist logic kind of its own contradictions kind of help us see a way out of that. You know what I mean? It's potentially at least its own gravedigger, because in order to resolve its contradictions, you have to think outside of it, and that like forces the human mind into different horizons. And so,
going back to the thing about the populist left, I'm sorry, were you not finished with your
point? No, go
ahead. Okay. The populist right, they do believe in things like, which is maybe has to do with the generations being younger and a lot of people growing up after the Iraq War and being like, oh, maybe the fucking Republicans, because there was a little tail between your legs after the Bush era, right? And therefore things like healthcare, right? Like nationalized health insurance and things like that. So I do think that there is like a real concern about things slipping like that. And then the other thing that, so they just kicked a guy off of the ballot illegally in North Carolina. They just kind of broke the rules and they were just like, fuck, Green Party candidate, you can't be part of the thing, even though you have the signatures. Then they also did this campaign where they started to message the people that were on that had signed it, and like, hey, they try to scare them and like, oh, we might lose it. Do you still want to make sure the Democrats might lose? Do you still want to put your signature on this, or do you want to take it away? And then they would say, yeah, I want to keep it, you know. And then it was like, oh no. And this was the fucking candidate they were texting with all of this shit, right? And what it made me realize is that because nobody that votes third party is ever gonna fucking vote for a Democrat. Like, you've either made that decision or you're not. Like, I don't know too many people that voted for fucking Ralph Nader that regret that and are like, you know what, man, I'm gonna fucking vote. Like, the reality is that if you're fucking done with Democrats, you're not gonna vote for them unless maybe it's down ticket shit, right? You'll go for your presidential candidate, and then you'll do you maybe be like, because it's easier than voting Republican, because you know that there may be, well, you can't really assume that they'll be pro-abortion, but not. But I think the main problem, the main reason that there is no third party is not because they'll fucking lose this next election. The problem is that if those people that won't vote Democrat but will vote third party start coming out en masse, then those politicians can start offering different things. They can start actually offering a choice that's not this. And maybe not one election, maybe not 2 elections, maybe not 3. But you'd be surprised at how quickly people would fucking abandon the Democratic Party if they had like a legitimate other opportunity. Maybe not this election, but that's why they always fighting to suppress that shit. Because if they let that shit slide just a little bit, it grows. It grows. You know, the reason Bernie Sanders was not effective is because he could just disband his movement because he wanted to still have his friendships with people. You know, he didn't want to be a class traitor ultimately, right? So
what kind? What do you? Like what class is he part of?
Well, he's a millionaire now, right? And he's been a politician for all this time, so he like fucking eats meals with these people, right? Like these are the relations. If I'm working at the NRA and I have all my friends there, I'm probably gonna have a different, you know. I'm gonna be like a little bit mealy mouth and wishy washy about, you know, gun control. So I mean, I think legitimately, like, there's literally nothing else after fucking abortion. What the fuck else are you gonna run on? Like, you're gonna run on something that you could literally fix right now because you have the people in Congress to do that, and you're not gonna even try.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we're going to vote our way out of the contradictions of capital.
Oh no, I don't think so either. So, I don't even think,
even
like,
with a third party.
No, I don't think so at all. I'm just saying that, like, I'm not saying that a third party is even the solution. I'm just saying that's where the fear comes from. Yeah. Right? Like, I don't, you know, it's not, but that goes against that goes for the argument as to like why you should even let it happen, right? It's fucking illusion that it steals votes.
Most people don't vote.
Exactly. And if you gave them something to vote for, then they would vote. So it's like they're both engaging in voter suppression. Yeah. It's about control, I think. Anyway.
I guess I always end up in this kind of place where I'm so critical of everything that, you know, you start to wonder, like, is this just kind of like idealist, or, you know, is this going to lead to any actual practice or anything? I feel like it's just attempting to be like baseline honest. You know what I mean? Like, I think the real utopian, this is something like Zizek says every 3 sentences, but I think it's true. Like, I think the real utopian idealism nowadays is to think that somehow things can keep going on in a similar way on the same trajectory and be sustainable. Like, that is really like,
I think that's what the proletariat is doing. I think that these other people probably have a plan because they think they can buy their way out of everything. You know, whether, I mean, it's probably not going to Mars because that sounds fucking asinine. But the idea of like, not everything here is going to suck. What's going to happen is that people, like, natural disasters are going to displace people. We're going to see Katrinas. We're going to see, like, you know, huge tsunamis and shit like that. And there's going to be refugees and we're not going to know what to do with them. And refugees, rich people, you know, like all my Cuban fucking people, all my people in Miami that left that were aristocrats. It's not difficult to be a refugee under those conditions. Yeah, you leave your shit behind. You lose your fucking money, but you got money to get out of the country. You don't have to fucking jump on a raft. Right? You can go to Mexico like my dad did You can pay for a ticket for your daughter, like my mom did.
Mhm.
There's people that couldn't do that shit. Like, there's also people that didn't want to do that shit because they were not the ones that were targets of that revolution.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, capital needs crises it needs to just periodically destroy large chunks of itself.
Yeah,
in order to
that's why
build.
we're in that 10-year cycle of
Yeah.
Occupy Wall Street, or the financial crash,
Yeah.
the COVID shit. Like,
It's funny to me, like, speaking of like just pharma stuff, made me think of like how it's interesting that like social media tends to like pick a figure like Martin Shkreli or something, who's like a scumbag, but like he's just doing what
well, that's the same thing.
every pharma executive is
Trump
incentivized to do.
Trump is the Shkreli of like fucking politicians.
Yeah, I think there's like a weird kind of illusion of perspective that happens with like kind of liberal media where it's this idea that if only we got rid of like these bad actors who are like, motivated by inscrutable just desire to do evil, then that would solve things. You know what I mean? Like there's no like
we replaced
analysis of like underlying contradictions of our whole system.
We replaced Trump with Biden, and people were very mad at Trump over Ukraine bullshit and like the corruption that's going on with fucking Biden and the laptops and all that stuff. Like, it's fucking crazy. Like,
yeah, it's not that different.
It's exactly the same thing. It's actually worse.
It's just friendlier.
It's worse.
I mean, then I guess like, yeah, that's
okay.
True.
Hold on. So let me just recap, because I just said it's worse, and I want to be clear on what I mean. Okay. Trump tried to get dirt on an opponent and threatened to withhold military aid. This other motherfucker got his son got a job, so that got a job at Burisma at an energy company, and if you remember, this war has to do with energy.
Mm-hmm.
And what's it called? It's like he so that he could get access. Like, which one's more competent?
Yeah, do you want
who's the competent Trump here?
Right. Do you want someone who's competent and makes you feel good, like everything's fine, or do you want someone who makes you alarmed and enraged and wants to,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Anyway, any parting thoughts? Anything that you maybe want to get correct and be like, I don't agree with this crazy person?
No.
Okay.
I probably.
You're not worried I'm going to get you canceled for saying that maybe only 16,000 people died?
Canceled from where? I'm not anyone that has a platform. I'm not worried. I'm not saying anything that controversial.
All right, man. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been a pleasure. I definitely do want to make some crazy synthwave shit with you at some point.
That'd be great.
So I was bummed that I didn't bring my micro freak, but then I was like, "There's no fucking way."
I need to see that in person sometime.
I just had so much shit. I live really close, and I was thinking this was your studio. This is actually your house, so it's not too inconvenient.
Yeah. Yep.
No, it's only your house.
I won't do any more work here. Yeah,
anything that we can plug for you, man?
Not really. Just
Justin Michell.
.com, yeah. That's
okay.
Or
and at
Michelle
Instagram
_Justin at Instagram, I think.
Was there already a Justin Michell?
Yeah. There's like a writer. And there's just some random.
There's no other Javier Proenza on social media, but there is there is a whatsmythesis.com that I'm very upset.
What was our thesis? I don't know if is it important that we have one?
Oh no, what's my thesis is a question.
Okay.
It's not an answer.
Yeah, I don't know if I have one.
I was trying to get you to solve. You're just throwing concerns,
spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks.
You're just bumming us out.
Yeah, I am. It's all
with no solutions.
Yeah.
No, yeah. I mean, I contributed a little bit to the bumming out.
Let's bum everybody out to the point where
I had to stop doing that when people weren't coming in to bum people out. That was me. That was part of me getting better.
I mean, it's easy to do. There's a lot of raw material for the bumming out mill.
Oh shit, man! It's not a fun.
But I do think like it's important. It's important to be honest and like if shit's bleak, start from there. Like,
Yeah, I think
be
that
able to articulate how bleak it is. You know what I mean?
Did you watch the last Matrix movie, the
No.
Reloaded one?
I heard it was terrible.
Oh, I really fucking liked
you
it.
liked it?
Yeah, but I
That's
did a
it.
bunch of drugs when I watched it.
Carl, I
Did
think,
not like it.
I don't know if he saw it or he was just describing it. We're both like,
Oh no.
yeah.
Well, there's a whole thing about free will in
Okay.
that, and there is an element.
This is Matrix 4 we're talking
Yeah.
about? Okay.
Yeah, they're never gonna make another one because it bombed.
Yeah.
But it's, in my opinion, it's number 1 and number 4 are the best ones. Because it's almost like number 4 is almost like it's a video essay about all the discourse. Because I don't know if you know, the Matrix has like a lot of philosophical shit tossed in there, so people like read read that shit with highlighters and stuff. Like it's like and so they address all of that in the movie. But to some point, I don't want to give too much away, but there is a question as to whether or not it is okay to wake someone up, which was not an element that was in the other ones. Like in the first 3 Matrixes, they're just like, we pull people out, like it's all good.
Yeah.
In this one, there's like,
is that even ethical?
Yeah, is it even ethical? And that's an interesting thing because it's like, yeah, you're talking about how how we see the world, but I don't think a lot of people can handle that. I think a lot of people struggle with that, and
I'm not sure why we could even like whatever, just detached or something.
Something's wrong with us, yeah, for sure. I recently found out that dyslexia is a neurodivergence, so I'm gonna use that as an excuse.
Yeah, there you go.
But yeah, I think that shit is a very crazy idea of like, that's kind of part of my coping, even like when I'm talking to someone who's like a shit lib and they're my friend. Yeah. Are we making eye contact and thinking of the same person?
So what's going on in your mind?
Yeah. No, and so
I don't know who you're talking about.
Oh, no. So to me, it is more of a thing of like recognizing that that person is not ready for me to fucking rant at them about how fucked they are.
Yeah. It's funny because my dad is a extreme contrarian, like kind of like conservative libertarian.
Mm-hmm.
So he rubs a lot of people the wrong way, and but I find him easy to talk to because we both like are so kind of like left field that we hate the same things for really different reasons, and it's kind of fun to compare like why you hate the same thing. But like, oh, I hate that for a completely different reason than you. Isn't that interesting?
It goes to that thing about like really enjoying watching Republicans shit on shit lips.
I mean, there's a certain aspect of like watching really bleak news where if it's all your enemies, like you kind of can just bring popcorn and just like, oh, that's interesting. I hate you both and you're fighting. Like, I can take my time and do something else.
Like, here's where I'm at, dude. I want Hillary to run again.
Just for comedic value?
I would have the best. Like, I'm just so beyond everything that I would fucking relish her running again.
Against Trump? Like,
yes,
why don't we just do that every 4 years? We'll
yes.
just have them run against each other.
I want it so bad. I know it's not going to happen because I want it too bad. But I would fucking love... Like, think about that.
She has the hubris where she would not understand why that's even a bad idea.
Yeah,
like,
no, well, people are writing articles about that now, and they're like, "There's whispers," and I'm like, but I'm like, but please.
I mean, it's hard to even.
It would be it would be the logical conclusion of the Democratic Party.
Yeah, I mean, they won last time. I thought they were like probably gonna shit the bed and be dead.
Nah, COVID.
COVID.
But
COVID was like, I don't know if Trump can ever recover from having overseen
I think he can.
COVID.
I think he can because Biden is worse.
I think they're just qualitatively different. I don't know which one is worse.
No, on COVID specifically.
Oh, yeah. I don't know. It's hard. It's like, do you want herpes or gonorrhea? I don't know. One stays with you for life, and it's relatively mild, and one is like bad, and then it goes away. I don't know who's who.
Oh man, you know your STDs. I didn't know about this.
You've never heard that metaphor before?
No,
that's like
no.
that's like
I mostly hang out at,
you know.
I mostly hang out at churches though, so you're not gonna hear that there.
Yeah.
All right, man. Well, okay, we'll leave it on that. And I really appreciate you coming on. It was nice to hang out. We've never really had a chance to do this.
It's funny, we didn't really talk about art. We could do a whole other podcast about art if you wanted.
Everybody's always like surprised. That's not like this. The show is artists talking about what they're into.
Okay.
Because you know, art is cool, but
let's talk about obscure Italian communists from 100 years ago.
It's what my thesis. It's what I want to learn.
Yeah.
What about collaborating? And the not that he's a shit lib, but he is a CNN watcher. Kellen, do you guys ever get into conversations about that kind of stuff?
Sure. I mean, we all like. There's something to hate about the world with any. There's something worth hating, and you're like, yeah, that does suck.
I love him.
No, we get along great. I mean,
to me, that's one of those things that's so crazy. Is like people are like, on the surface, so like, oh no, these people like these opinions are bad, but like I'm sure I have some odious opinions in his mind.
we all do. Let's all just cancel each other and get it over with, and then start over.
I love you, Kellen.
I mean, I think a lot of people, if I start talking, and you know, I think a lot of people on paper would agree with a lot of what kind of world I would want, but you know, I think it's understandably hard for a lot of people to imagine a world outside of the options that are given, because there literally is nothing on the table that's presented. Like we would, you know, like it's a long shot. It might not ever happen. Like we might just descend into capitalist hellscape and become extinct as a species. That's more likely maybe than getting our shit together and getting out of this. So I don't know what to offer, but
I don't know if I'm counting wrong, but
like I said, I always just try to have a baseline honesty.
Yeah.
That like, if you're gonna solve bleak situations, you have to at least start from
the truth. Yeah.
Yeah, an honest appraisal of what it is, and
I
in a way, like it's cathartic to just describe the bleakest possible reality that you can, because at least like articulate it, you're not going to do anything without if you can't even articulate what it is. So it at least feels like something proactive to even be able to accurately describe the world you live in. And it's like a Herculean effort that it takes to even approach that, because it's so wrapped in so many layers of like obfuscation and you know, just everyday ideology. Like ideology is what you do every day. It's what it's the fact that you keep coming back and trying to do things the same way. You know what I mean? It's even if you take like a cynical distance from it, you really believe in it if you keep doing it. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I think like
some like chaos magic shit you just said.
I guess, yeah.
It's like fucking ritual magic.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, like definitely can't disagree with that.
I mean,
and I would definitely say that
I think there is a like market fundamentalism is a kind of superstition.
Yeah,
you know what I mean, it's the religion of our world. It's the
and
to think that the market will solve everything is a blatantly superstitious idea that it flies.
I don't think anyone actually believes that. I don't think anyone that benefits from that belief actually believes that.
Yeah, I mean that's an extremist, but still.
No, but I'm saying like I think that anybody who says that they believe in the free market is like full of shit. Mm-hmm. They just believe in making money without regulation. They don't actually think that. They don't believe in the myth that that is intrinsic in the ideology that the market will fix everything, because if they did, they wouldn't ask for fucking bailouts. You know, like they know.
I mean, there's some like libertarians that are like, you know, we should let it collapse, like let the two big companies fail, and
those are not,
because what we have is not real capitalism. And,
okay, well then those
which is funny, because I always like if you're kind of like if you're defending communism a lot, you get in this kind of trap where people are like, oh, so everything that happened is not real communism, which I would be like, yeah, it's not. But it's funny that there's the opposite end of like, this is not real capitalism. There's like,
Yeah.
Like I forget the like. There's like anarcho-capitalists out there. Have you ever encountered these people?
No, that's what we live. That's where
Yeah.
we're headed.
Yeah.
That's like literally like anarcho-capitalism, where it's like there's no police force. It's private security forces. Everybody,
Yeah.
like we're already there. It's not like the police serve the poor.
There's people who actually believe that there's like, I don't know if you call it utopian, but that's like, will produce a better world. It's like, we're already kind of, like you said, we're already, you can see where that's going. You're sure it's right there.
You've read Snow Crash.
No.
You're a huge sci-fi guy. I thought I didn't bring it up
at the gaps in it.
I didn't bring it up at the party because I thought it was too cliche when we were talking about.
No, I should do the audiobook for Snow Crash.
Snow Crash is great.
Classic that you always hear. Like,
yeah, it's about anarcho-capitalism. It's fucking awesome, but it's a horrible place to live.
Right. It's a good book.
Wouldn't
want to live there.
Good book, great heroes, but their life sucks.
Yeah.
I mean, it's awesome and there's a lot of action, but it's the gig economy. That's like, it's everybody's an independent. It's the fucking Great Reset. It's you will own nothing and be happy.
I wonder, I mean, we could go on. We don't have to turn this off. We can keep going. What's interesting to me is like about predictions that Marx made was that he was writing at the very beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and it was like capitalist production was on the ascendancy, right? And it was growing, and it needed a workforce. So the portion of the world that was like it wanted to sink its teeth into and were vital to its growth was growing. And what if we've like reached a stage where because a lot of the richest people in the world now, like Zuckerberg or Jeff Bezos or whatever, they own they don't own a factory or something. They own like the platform, right? That people use. And so it's kind of more like if you have like the labor theory of value, right? That makes sense if you're producing items that can be, for all intents and purposes, reproduced infinitely, right? Like if you're making like pencils or spoons or cars or whatever the fuck, like these aren't like they can be luxury items, but the point is that you're competing with other firms to produce something that is not unique. It's a mass-produced item so where the value of that comes from is that it represents the embodiment of a certain amount of labor, right? That's like the labor theory of value. That's like not even Marx. That's pre-Marx. That's like David Ricardo and whoever, like the economists that he was critiquing were. But if you have so that's one way that like value is manifest in like price or whatever, like exchange value, right? Is a representation in some level of like embodied labor that someone has done at some point. But the other way that you can get rich in this world is not necessarily exploiting labor, but exploiting. I mean, you still are, like obviously Jeff Bezos is, but you can exploit a monopoly of whatever kind, like of land, a valuable land that has resources on it, of intellectual property, copyright, whatever. So that's almost more like, Marx had this idea that over time, the tendency of the rate of profit would decrease. And that's what causes crises, because capitalism is always kind of acting against its own contradictory tendency to be able to make less on investment. Because it's a really simple idea. When you have two companies that compete, one of them can have a advantage if they can be more have a higher productivity with like automating certain things, and for a limited time until the rest of their competitors catch up and also adopt that technology, they'll have an edge because they can produce with like less work. less labor they have to pay. So if you suddenly invent like the cotton gin or whatever, like labor saving device, you have a competitive edge. And so it incentivizes like making labor obsolete, even though labor exploitation is the lifeblood of how
Yeah.
capitalist profit happens. So
I mean, since slavery was abolished, I guess, right?
Yeah, yeah. But now, you know, if you have control, if you have like a unique work of art, like if you have the Mona Lisa, or if you have like a brand name that only you're supposedly allowed to produce, like Nike, or you know what I mean, like, or if you have a IP like Adobe Creative Suite or something, you can also leverage a monopoly, even if you're not like exploiting labor to the same degree, or even able to exploit labor. So that's a kind of like a.
But I would say that
we're getting in this weird phase maybe of capitalism where it's almost like back to feudalism in a way, because it's based on like rent. Like Adobe Creative Suite, the model is to like be like to charge everyone rent for software. You can't even like buy the software and just have it then.
Yeah.
Because you have
Same thing with Pro Tools.
You
it's fucking $1,000 a year.
Yeah, you have to pay. You're paying rent to someone who has a monopolistic title over like a certain like property.
It is. I mean, the Pro Tools is a perfect example because it's an industry standard. So to be part of the industry or to adhere to those standards, you have to fucking do it. But if you're a freelancer and you most of the time you want to use shit like Adobe Premiere and whatnot, as opposed to which is a much cheaper rental than Pro Tools, which is like an insane amount of money to fucking invest in. So it makes it almost prohibitive to it becomes a barrier of like to entry into certain industries as a consequence of that as well. The other thing, hold on, let me see if I can remember it, is that we still have all the same laws in the books that broke up monopolies in the past. Like all of that shit is still in place. Now, why are they not implementing it? Because the business is not the same as Microsoft, right? Microsoft was not a company that could censor people, that could, be like, we're gonna make Chris Hedges disappear entirely from the internet. Like he's worked on this show for 6 years. We're just gonna take it, gonna completely, 6 years worth of labor completely gone. I lost my account for Instagram, 4 years worth of work just promoting the podcast, all of that. I can't even put it on my resume anymore because now I only have like 100 and something, some odd followers. And it is a way of controlling what the discourse is entirely, right? Because now, instead of regulating these people, they have like a little bit of a relationship where it's like, if let's say Hillary Clinton has an embarrassing photograph, she could probably get it scrubbed. Yeah. Can we? No. And it's an interesting relationship that's happening because there is incentive for the legislators. I mean, there's so many things that are fucking wrong with our legislature. Mainly the reason that like they are the ones that are supposed to declare war. They won't do it because any war that they vote for is going to be just for them to campaign against them, but they want the war, so they just leave the fucking authorizations from the Bush era. So you're never gonna get them to legislate on war. You're never gonna get them to legislate on abortion. That shit is like, I mean, if they're not doing it now, that's never fucking gonna happen. Like, I'm sorry, I really am sorry. It's a sad thing. I'm not telling you with glee. But yeah, it is an interesting thing because our country hasn't changed. Our politicians have, and their priorities have in that sense. Because, like, I don't know if you remember, they used to fucking pie Bill Gates. Do you have you seen that footage? Yeah, he's just fucking like, and that was that was when he was doing that debt thing, the what's it called, the debt imperialism that we were talking about earlier, where he was just locking in all of Africa into his operating system so that they were he was giving it away for free, but then
Mhm.
updates and all of that shit. Now you're
Right.
just your whole ecosystem is based on that. Anybody who's tried to leave Apple knows how fucking serious of a fucking thing that is.
I think maybe like if we're ever gonna move past a capitalist world, I think maybe we'll get some insight in how to do that from like addiction recovery, because
Mm-hmm.
it really is like it incentivizes and intensifies all addictive cycles.
Yeah.
Like meth is almost like the perfect capitalist commodity because it's super cheap to make. It's you can expand the market indefinitely, and I mean it destroys its own base after a while, but you
It's
can
also weird because it just like capitalism just rewards sociopathy,
uh
right? Like that's the profit margin,
yeah
or the profit motive is like all about like if you're okay, the less empathy you have, the better you are at your job.
yeah yeah like as far as like platforms too, like there's a lot of cases in which like Amazon actually takes a loss on some of the items they sell
Yeah,
just in order
that's what Uber did.
to kill the competition in certain strategic places.
Yeah, that's the same thing that Uber like that. Now it's market disruption, and what they do is they just have the resources to disrupt the market at a loss, and
Mm.
then when all the competition is gone, then they can start to fucking charge the premiums and start to make their profits. Oh, I don't even know if like I haven't checked, but I can't imagine that Uber's profitable yet.
I don't know. I mean, there's still competition. Like there's Lyft and stuff, right? I don't know if they've
Yeah,
like completely saturated the.
and then going back to neolibs, who was the one that made that shit possible? Eric Holder was a
Mhm.
fucking was fighting to make Uber be able to disrupt markets in like that, and all these people. And that's not to say that there's not problems with like the industry in itself. I know that it wasn't great for like taxi cab drivers, but now motherfuckers are in debt and they can't pay it off because their industry but they still owe the money for the fucking for the industry to the industry that has been disrupted. It's like the fucking craziest thing.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Evil genius.
we should wrap up because I'm actually worried. This one's not gonna die on me, but I'm worried that
Okay.
that one's gonna die on me.
All right.
But it has been a pleasure, dude. We
Yeah.
could
Hopefully,
obviously
this would
keep.
be the start of future conversations.
Yeah,
too,
for sure.
because,
I would definitely have you back on easily, like especially maybe in your studio next time at a more reasonable temperature.
Yeah.
Uh,
Sometimes I like when I talk to someone, I feel like I'm some strange thing that's been left in the fridge for a really long time, and it's like become all kinds of strange colors. And
Oh, that's why I
you're
do
like, whoa. And it has,
It's cynical in there.
we need like a getting acquainted period where we're even like speaking the same language. after a
No,
while.
no. I mean, I feel like we've been on the same
Yeah,
page
yeah.
this time. I've been excited since we had the conversation the other day. I didn't mean to start it with Trotskyism. I think maybe the right question would have been like, "Tell me about lefty shit."
Yeah. Yeah, like what are you into? What are you
Yeah,
reading?
yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, we'll definitely have you back on for sure because that's also just the convenience of like coming here
Mhm.
if I get
Yeah,
desperate.
let's do a. Well, I don't feel like I'm an expert on anything either, which is like fine.
Oh no,
Like I don't feel like I need to be, but like
well, the whole
it's
point is that I want artists to talk about what they're into because, first of all, they're into it. Secondly, it's easier than talking about yourself,
hmm,
right? Like I think usually I can tell by 10 minutes in, I always do like a little like, hey, where you from and all that. I can already feel the guest is like, all right, let's get to the topic because it's a crutch. And then some people are like, nah, no topic.
some people can talk about themselves a lot. I'm not that interested in myself.
No,
really,
no.
you know what I mean?
Well, I'm
Like,
also not that interested in people. I'm interested in what they're interested in,
Yeah,
not their fucking personal
exactly.
history.
Right.
And then also like it almost on this show. I mean, I that's not. This is gonna sound weird. I do like your work, and I've told you I like your work.
Hmm.
I am not always interested in only having people whose work I like
Hmm.
because who the fuck am I?
Yeah, I'm not always interested in talking about art either.
Oh yeah.
Like in a certain way, I feel like there's a expectation that when you make art, it's like to talk about because you go through grad school or whatever, and that's all you do.
It can
And
be really masturbatory.
I feel like artists don't really run the art world, and that's kind of a shame. Like,
Yeah.
like I don't think there's not the same expectation that music is supposed to like have a thesis. If like,
All right,
what's your thesis?
Yeah.
I don't know. Not that your show is like about what's your art thesis, but like
No.
that's when you know what I mean. Like,
What's your thesis is like is like what's your topic, and then also I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about, and it's okay if you don't.
Like sometimes, even though I went through that academia mill, and I can talk about art if I have to. In some ways, why I'd make visual art is because there's things that are better explored non-verbally. You know what I mean? Like it's a field where you can actually just respond and to the world around you visually. And I think like in some way that's like since like kind of the end of modernism or whenever that was, that's not really, it's looked down upon, I think, in a way. Like that like Duchamp called disparagingly certain art that he called retinal, which was like just about like, I guess like op art would be like a good example of that.
Although I do like some op art, but
no, I love all that shit too. I'm saying that I like that.
Yeah. I find, look, man, the reality is that if you start talking about the art world, you're gonna be talking about a lot of white dudes, which is why I don't, and not that I have like, but like I have a lot of women on the show. I try to have diverse people. I try to have gay people on the show, and no one's forbidden from talking about art. The one thing that I try to stay away from is like, if we're like looking at your painting and we're describing it, because that's like tedious to listen to on a podcast. Yeah. But sometimes we have conversations about art, and it's fascinating. Yeah. But not everybody wants to talk about art. Art. Okay.
I wish, in a certain way, I wish I could just be a visual artist and never have to talk about the work.
Yeah.
Like one time I saw, and it's funny because this artist is, I saw Raymond Pettibon talk once in Chicago, and he has a lot of text in his art. So his art is already talking, and he's like, his art addresses like topical things that like critics and writers would love because there's plenty to talk about there. I think sometimes if you make art that isn't easy to talk about, it just completely gets ignored. And you almost have to have like a gimmick, like it's a prop for like writers and critics to write about.
Or some of my conceptual stuff, it's like I can tell you what the premise is and you'll get it, but it's not the same thing as experiencing the piece, right? Yeah. So it gets it's tricky. It really like and I respect podcasts that are just full on art, and some of them are way more successful than this one. So I have no grudge. It's just more of what good can I do.
Yeah. When I saw Raymond Pettibon speak, he was so awkward and unable to like get a full sentence out that part of me was like rejoiced, like if he can like have an art career, then like you really, maybe that's a ray of hope that you don't have to necessarily always be able to speak to talk about it, to do it.
I'm not even, it's not even that I'm afraid to do it, like, cause I can hang, but, and it kind of comes up peripherally. We just had we're just also fucking lefty nerds. So we got very much into those weeds, but, people will talk to me about painting. I just want people to have the ability to talk about whatever they want, because like you can't go on a date and be like, hey, tell me about what the fucking coolest shit is, but you kind of try to make that happen, like it's the same shit, except I just don't fucking finesse you. I'm like, here, talk about what you want. I want to talk about what you want to talk about. Right? Like it's but that's when it's most successful, I find. When it's most interesting, when someone gets to talk about what they're passionate about.
It's nice you can have these like kind of long form discussions too, like that's what podcasts are good for.
Well, I was thinking about
like a lot of people don't like Joe Rogan because he like promotes, like he gives a platform to people certain people don't like, and also like he's like getting people to take horse tranquilizer, yada yada. It's like I think the good thing, even if you don't like him, is like that how often before the internet did you ever watch a TV show where someone actually talks about something for more than like 2 minutes. You know what I mean?
No, and that's
like
why
just having like long form discussions.
that's why
is
he's
important.
destroying the news media.
Yeah.
You like, okay, first of all, just a slight correction, because it is my industry now and I am very well versed in this. He invented the long form podcast. People used to tell him to cut his podcast down because it was like 3 hours long. This is I tend to go like an hour. That's usually my if it goes long, I always, if I'm friends with someone, it usually will go long too. Right? But yeah, that is why he is destroying everybody, because there is nowhere else that you can do that. And while I was driving over here, I was gonna say, I was thinking about it, and there was an addendum afterwards to the thought. But I was like, if I've sat down with you and I've talked to you for an hour, I probably know you better than most people that I run through a gallery and like talk to for 10 minutes. And have that relationship with them for like 3 months. Like let's say I see you at, we're gonna be familiar. Like our relationship has gotten deeper just because we've had this conversation, even though we've spent time in spaces together. And
I think people don't talk on the phone as much as they used to
either. Yeah, and I do that now. After podcasting, I'll straight up call up like friends and just be like, "Yo, fucking, we're doing this," and even if they're like a little weird.
You're busy because it's not gonna be like a 1 minute call. It's gonna be like a sit down visit.
And
I should do that more. I miss my friends on the East Coast.
Yeah,
we used to talk on the phone a lot, and the only people I talk on the phone extended are family members.
They're gonna be like, "Is everything okay, man? Yeah. Are you dying?" But yeah, no, and I basically consider everybody that has been on the show that I've talked to for at least an hour, like I consider them a friend, not like at least a step beyond acquaintance, right? Until they don't promote the show.
Then they're enemies.
And then I'm like, oh, I guess we're not friends. I thought you loved me.
You mean like the show in general, or the show
like their episode when they don't like put it on Instagram?
Wait, so I'm gonna have to like put images and sound of myself out there.
You're gonna have to
share people to.
Yeah. That is the problem that artists have. That's why I'm using YouTube now, so that I don't have to depend on you motherfuckers to promote me and let you. Here I am showing you to my whole audience, and motherfuckers are like, I'm shy. Anyway.
As long as I don't have to watch it.
Yeah, you don't have to watch it. You can just share it.
Okay.
All right, man.
All right.
Anyway, we'll talk soon, and then I need to come up with a sign off. I'm gonna do that right now. Jiminy Crickets, thanks for watching the show.
All right.
I think that's gonna be it. I got hit with inspiration. All right. And I think that's lasting. I think that's going to be it from now on. All right.
Jiminy Crickets.
Thanks, Jiminy Crickets. Thanks for watching. Oh, maybe see you in hell.
That's already taken. That's Red Scare.
All right. Thanks again, and we'll see you guys next week.